Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University. In today's episode of giving every Pokemon a scientific name, I still need to come up with a catchier name for this series. We'll be correcting a couple of mistakes slash edits, I guess, that have occurred in Generation 1 and wrapping up Generation 1 with the legendary Pokemon. So without further ado, let's recap our rules of the series. Number 1, all names are given in Greek and or Latin. Neither of which I speak, so if the grammar and or pronunciations are a little bit off, please don't kill me too much in the comment section. And also, these names apply to every Pokemon in the family. So for instance, we're going to be talking about Eevee again because I made a slight mistake. So the name that I give Eevee will apply to all 8 of its evolutions and any possible future evolutions as well. So with that, let's talk about Eevee. So it was brought to my attention, this completely slipped my mind, and I remember sort of thinking it while I was writing the script for last episode of this series, but the genus that I gave Eevee, which I believe was Polymutatio, was already used. I used that for Tyrogue. Generally, if you give two things the same genus name, that means that they're extremely closely related, basically as closely related as two different species can be. You can see that in Venomoth and Butterfree, because I gave both of them the same genus name as well. Clearly, Eevee and Tyrogue are not even remotely similar other than the fact that they're probably both mammals. So with that, I decided to change Eevee from Polymutatio vulpes to Multiforma vulpa, which basically exact same meaning. It means many-formed fox. Same gist, just different name, just to clarify that Tyrogue and Eevee are not that closely related at all. Next up is Kangaskhan, and Kangaskhan I didn't really make a mistake like I did with Eevee. This was more something that I thought about afterward, after I published the video, and was like, you know, I want to change that. Not because the name that I gave it was like inappropriate or like didn't quite work. The name that I gave it was Genghis Rufus, which, you know, Genghis comes from Genghis Khan, which is the historical figure that Kangaskhan gets its name from, and the Rufus part is the species part of the name of the red kangaroo. So I thought it worked quite well, but literally like 2 or 3 days after I published that video, all of the leaks from Generation 1, like the unused sprites and names and things like that, came out, and it turned out that, like many people had thought for years, Kangaskhan is basically a Cubone whose mother never died, and the Cubone grew up. So, in respect to that, there's many videos about it. I will probably make one at some point, if I remember. But, basically, we're changing Kangaskhan's name from Genghis Rufus to the name that we gave Marowak, which is Pinacalvus solum, which means lonely bone staff. Lastly, for the corrections, I completely just forgot about Starmie. I realized it after I had already published the video that it was supposed to go up in, and meant to talk about it in every video since, and it just has not happened. I always forget about it, and I don't know why. So today, we're not forgetting about it. Starmie's scientific name is Stelicidus lapillus, which means gemmed rainy star. Obviously, the gem refers to the big gem on its chest. Do starfish have chests? Anyway, the big gem in the center of its body, as well as it being a water type and a starfish, or sea star, because they're not actually fish, they're echinoderms, so call them sea stars, not starfish. Okay, so, with those corrections out of the way, let's move on to the actual juice of this episode, the Legendaries plus Dragonite. So first up are Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. And a really big part of me wanted to put them all in the same genus, but just looking at them, they really don't look similar enough. And granted, like, there are a lot of, especially in birds, classification in birds is weird, because there's thousands, literally thousands of different species of birds that are all varying degrees of, you know, closely related to each other, but it's weird because some that are closely related to each other might not look all that much alike, whereas some that are not related to each other look very similar due to something called convergent evolution. Essentially, convergent evolution is when things figure out like a body plan or like a color scheme that works really well for their environment, so they evolve it independently. You can think of things like, you know, a sea turtle flipper and the flipper of, say, like a plesiosaur, something like Lapras. Those two animals, it's not like there was one animal that went back to the water that split into turtles and plesiosaurs. It happened twice. But they were like, hey, this kind of fin shape works pretty well. So it evolved several times. That's convergent evolution. So basically for Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, I just decided to give them all their separate genera, but I gave them all the same species part of the name just to help signify that they are closely related. I would definitely put them all in the same family, which is the classification step right above genus. But that's about as closely related as I'm willing to put them. And just to signify that they're sort of special, what I did was I just gave each of them their own name as their genus. Because for certain animals, for a lot of animals actually, mostly extinct animals, the name that we all know them by is their genus. Because you think, Velociraptor, that's its genus name. The scientific name of a velociraptor is Velociraptor mongoliensis. So, for Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, I gave them the scientific names Articuno avum, Zapdos avum, and Moltres avum, which just is their name, and then bird at the end, because they're the legendary birds. After the birds, we have Dragonite. Dragonite was very, very simple, because it is the first dragon-type Pokemon, the first real dragon-type Pokemon. We have Charizard, who's like a dragon, and then Seadra, weirdly, or Kingdra. We've already talked about Kingdra, but in the Pokedex, Dragonite is the first real dragon. So, in honor of that, I named it Dracus Dracus, or Dragon Dragon. Finally, for Generation 1, we have Mew and Mewtwo. Now, this one was actually rather easy, but it's a little difficult to explain, just because of how different they look. Like, the lore is very, very clear, so I 100% stand by my opinion in that Mew and Mewtwo are the same Pokemon. They just are. And because of this, I gave them the same scientific name. Because it's basically like they just genetically altered Mew to basically put it on steroids. There's examples of people doing this in real life with, I'm taking a genetics class right now, and it's actually really funny. We talked about some scientists, I think in China or Japan, I don't quite remember, but they altered the genetics of two beagles to make them literally jacked. They are so hyper muscular. I'll try to put a picture on screen because it's actually ridiculous how funny these beagles look, because they are just so incredibly beefy that it looks ridiculous, but they're still beagles. And at the end of the day, that's really all Mewtwo is to Mew. It's just normal Mew, but jacked out of its mind. So because of this, I decided to focus more on Mew's lore, which is that it was the first Pokemon, and that all Pokemon are descended from Mew. And while I don't quite think that's the case in the sense of evolution, because that's not how evolution works, I'm just gonna roll with it anyway, and I'll figure that out later. I'll leave that to Birdkeeper Toby in his, scientific tree of life, which is a phenomenal series. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. There'll probably be a link to it up here somewhere. But Mew's scientific name is Primus Genesis, or First Genesis, because it is the first Pokemon. That about does it for Generation 1. If you have any thoughts, suggestions for Generation 2, let me know down below. If you have a favorite particular scientific name that we used for Generation 1, let me know that as well. My personal favorite is probably the one that I gave Pidgeotto way back in Episode 1, which translates to Bird Jesus. I thought it was funny. Maybe it's just me. But let me know what you're excited for in Generation 2. Feel free to smash that thumbs up down below and make me feel all sorts of good deep down inside. Follow us on Twitter as well to keep up on everything Pokemon science. And as always, there's a time and place for everything.